Just checking some mic check. Anybody? I like for my own stream to pop up on my own website, so that way I know I can start talking about what I want to talk about. So that way I know I can start talking about what I want to talk about. All right, I'm live. So I got some stuff that I want to talk about. And it involves HEMA. Surprise. Whoop-de-doo. Our current protection in HEMA isn't enough, right? Everybody knows what fencing masks are. I shouldn't have to explain what a fencing mask is. Some people spend a lot of money on the 1600 Newton rated mask, only to realize that it's just the bib portion, just the neck portion is rated for that. The mask itself is not. Fun stuff, things you learn. I should start off like slightly better, right? There was what I'm going to say is a concern about safety, right? And I really care about safety. I care about my fencing partners, and I think it's a great opportunity to evaluate where we are in HEMA, right? What are we doing? What do we do on a day-to-day basis? What do we do when we read a book? What do we do when we pick up a sword and hit each other, right? You'll see in the background, right? I've got this video playing. It's one of my old videos, just to give you something to watch while I'm talking. So, what do you think is safe in HEMA? All right, do you think it's safe to hit someone in the head? Do you think it's safe to drill without a mask on? Do you think it's safe to fence without a rubber tip? Without shoes, right? Do you think it's safe to consider the environment you're in and to worry about heat management? I mean, these are questions that I think about on occasion. I talk about on occasion. I consider, right? I try to anyway, think about the worst case scenario. And how to best prepare and prevent injuries in the sport or the martial art that we all like to practice. And of course, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's just watch some videos, right, called HEMA. Right, click through the same place you found this, no worries, whatever. So I'm gonna start by saying, like, our current protection is inadequate, and we all know this, and we've accepted it for like the longest time. All right, I've been doing HEMA since 2016, and it's like, hey, we've got these lacrosse gloves that we're gonna do nylon longsword with, or synthetic longsword, and like people still get broken fingers. Spoiler alert: I'm gonna be talking about stuff that I know about or I have seen. So like, trigger warning if you don't want to hear about like gore or like blood or accidents happening, because that's valid. If you don't want to hear it, like, you should probably not listen to this. Like, I'm not going to go into gory detail. I'm not going to name drop. I'm just going to say these are the things that I've heard about. If you've been in the community for a while, like, you've probably heard about them too. Whatever. So we know our protection isn't great, right? I've got a nylon sword right here, nylon long sword. Super flexible, right? Super flexible. Still got a chunk of steel right here, right? The main safety issue with these is people feel like they're safe when they use them, right? So they tend to hit harder, and they're weighted a little differently than a normal fetter would be. Like, not too much, but they just feel, I don't know. I've never liked the feeling of them. The tip is, let's see if you can see that, pretty flared out and spatulated, I guess you could say. Here, I got a piece of paper just for this. All right. It doesn't help that this is white and the paper is white. Oh well, better luck next time. Just use a nylon, it's safer. Is it? All right. Of course, like I said, if you've been around for a while, you've heard people say, don't spar in lacrosse gloves unless you've modified them to be stronger. Don't spar in light gloves unless, like, you understand what you're doing, or you're slow sparring, right? There's different levels to sparring, right, in my opinion. And I try to define them. I'm going to go ahead and try to define them now. There's slow play, which is almost like turn-based combat, where I throw a strike in a very slow tempo. You respond appropriately or not appropriately because you're learning. And it's not really sparring, right? It's slow play. You're playing slow. There's slow sparring, which you are trying to touch the opponent, but you're still giving them the opportunity to defend themselves. If they make a mistake, like, you lightly touch them, you lightly tap them, right? Then there's sparring, which generally is not what you see in this video right here. What you see in this video right here is someone leading and someone following and maintaining distance and footwork. Regular sparring, right? I would say regular in-house sparring, in-house being internal, would be between, I don't know, whatever you want to do, right? If you say, hey, I want to take it easy, this is a warm-up round, let's just, it's not slow play, it's not slow sparring, you're just not super aggressive, you're not super committed to anything, you're just warming up and waking up, right? All the way up to what I would consider just below tournament level sparring, right? Or competition sparring, which is about 70% of your intensity. With that being said, like, tournament sparring is, in my opinion, 75% intensity, right? You still maintain control. You're not swinging for the fences. You're not trying to hurt anyone. You're trying to clear a line, cover a line, protect yourself, and score a point. The historical application of that is slightly different because sport is sport. I'm going to check my cellular device because I can. All right, so equipment not being, really standardized across the board is kind of what this topic is about, or what this video is about. There are so many things that we can complain about and address and control, but we're kind of stuck with these fencing masks, right? The best fencing mask I've run across is Absolute Force. It's like $70. It's durable, it's sturdy because it's made out of thicker, cheaper material. So it makes it heavier and makes it more durable, right? Other masks tend to, like, dent. And why are we denting masks? Because we have bad control, right? I say we as a community, not we as a regular practice group who burns through denting fencing masks. That's not what I mean. I say we as a community, the HEMA community, right? I talked about gloves. I talked about masks. Shoes. Like, what is a good HEMA shoe? Like, there used to be one of the Facebook pages I followed. Used to be like every Friday they talked about footwear, And it was like a scheduled thing that was hilarious, right? As long as your foot's covered, you should be all right, in my opinion. You can fence barefoot if you want. Cool, no problem. I prefer to wear wrestling shoes. Um, I feel like it gives me a little more grip. Because guess what? You've got arteries all over your body. The top of your foot has some arteries in it. Just like, the soft parts of the internal palms or wrists, what I mean to say. Arteries are fucking everywhere. Which, I've got some talking points, which is why I keep looking over here. So if we're talking about arteries and we're talking about fencing and we're talking about, the potential for injury and staying safe, is that why we wear Newton rated clothing instead of padding? Like, absolutely. So I had to do some Googling today, and turns out in the 121 years that Olympic fencing has been around, 8 people have passed away from it. Blade breaks, various things, accidents. More notably, when you Google it, there's an instance where someone's foil breaks, gets stuck into the fencing mask, punctures the fencing mask, enters the eye, and goes into the brain. And the fella dies from it. And that really increased safety standards across the board. I don't remember what year that was. I did Google it, but, I'm not an encyclopedia myself. But they increased quality of the foils, they increased the quality of the masks, they increased the quality of the fabrics. But funny enough, like, the fabric isn't what failed in that instance, it was the mesh. And I am going to get back to that at a certain point in time. But what's Newton rating? It's a puncture. I don't think it's cut resist. I think it's puncture resist. That's one thing I didn't Google today. But it's like a level of durability that requires a certain amount of force to penetrate that fabric. You layer it up if you want. You can do 2 350s. You can do an 800 and a 350 under it. I know Spez has like a sweatshirt that's like 350. They've got pants that are 350, which I'm going to get back to again at a later point in the conversation. But if you look at what Olympic fencers wear, they wear like 2 or 3 different layers depending on what they're doing, foil, epee, or saber. And they wear like Kevlar, and they have strict rules to follow with their equipment. Why is that a good thing? Because it keeps them alive when a blade breaks, right? Again, I said I've been doing this since 2016. I've seen a handful of blades break. I broke a blade myself. It was sometime in 2017. And it was under warranty, right? Most fetters, it was a Regenier fetter. You get like a 2-year warranty. It broke after like 3 months. Quality of steel was not great. Fetters, when I say fetters, I mean a longsword. All right, I've got a bunch of examples here. All right, this is my Albion Meyer. It's a longsword. It's a 2-handed longsword. It's pretty light. I don't know what happened in production. The new one that I seen was much heavier than this and balanced weird. But normally when blades break, longsword blades, they break in this area. And you think, okay, well that's breaking. Oh, should I put this in my hand and try to flex it? Maybe not. That's breaking because of a flex, right? Not so much. Every blade that I've seen break, personally, has broken from impact on another blade. You both cut 2 Oberhaus, you both cut as hard as you can, you're trying to Zorn Ort, you're trying to clear that center line. You both are very hard in the bind and the blade breaks, right? There's been an instance where multiple blades have broken in the same match. Like, what are we doing? right? At a certain point in time, what are we doing, right? If we're if we're breaking blades left and right, there's a force problem there. Now, I hope that since 2017, 2018, that like we've grown and like stopped breaking longsword blades by brute force. But I'm sure that it still happens. I'm sure like excessive force still happens in club and no one says anything, which I'm gonna get back to later. But I want to talk about blade profiles for a little bit, right? I pulled this one out. All right, this is my Albion Meyer. Great blade. You noticed I didn't have a tip on it, right? Right? Can you see that? Can we see that? No rubber tip, no protection, right? Why do I have a fetter with no protection on it? I don't really spar with this. It's rusty, right? Look at all that rust. Ugh. Don't want to spill my water. Look at all that rust, right? I didn't clean it. I don't keep it clean. That's more better rust that you can see. But I love drilling with it. I love doing solo work with it. I have sparred with it. I have slow sparred with it. But this is predominantly I want to go outside and swing a sword and have a nice feeling sword. This feels amazing in my opinion. But if you notice, let's see if I can catch this on camera just right. If you notice how thin this is, all right, I'm looking at my camera to see, make sure I'm all lined up right. We look how thin this is. That can really hurt. All right, that could injure someone. If I cut with full intention and malicious behavior, I guarantee that I can dent a fencing mask. I guarantee that I could break bones. I guarantee that I can give someone contusions to prevent them from walking normally. Like, hematomas are not cool. Hematomas, for those of you who are uneducated, are large, lumpy bruises because you got internal swelling and shit. I had to learn that because I'm also uneducated, so don't feel bad. But imagine that thrust straight towards you, right? There's not a lot of surface area there. Now, I did have a tip on this one point. I did practice with this at one point. I had some leather on it. I had a rubber tip on it, and then I didn't like the rubber tip, so then I put some leather on it. Both appropriate in the events that I practice in. Both appropriate in the schools in the local area. As an approved way to tip a sword. I shouldn't say sword, I should say fetter. To tip a sparring fetter for safety purposes. But the blade profile here is vastly different than a foil or an epee or an Olympic saber. I have a small sword here, which is the closest thing to an Olympic blade. And it is on my small sword. Alright? It's a very small, very dainty, a very fun, fast weapon to play with. You notice I've got a very tiny tip on it right here. I also don't know if you can notice that this is like a V profile, right? There's a groove on one side and a protrusion on the other side, creating a V, which ideally the wire would run down. The tip would be not electrified, but wired to a button. And when the button is pressed, the buzzer goes off, right? Ideally, in the Olympics, as far as I understand, which isn't much. So you can hold me to it if you want, but I wouldn't recommend it. These blades, I'm gonna struggle with that throughout this entire video. These blades, these foils, these sparring tools, these blades break quite often, much more often than fetters do. Now, I don't have any context for this. I don't have any numbers. I don't have any studies. But these break all the time. And I know that because I've got a few friends who did it in college, who did it in high school, who did it after college, and they're like, yeah, you always carry extra blades with you because they always break. And this was, I don't know, 90s, early 2000s, whatever, right? The pressure to cause this to bend isn't a lot. I'm sure you can look up online how much force it takes to bend it at a certain degree or angle or measurement or whatever. But when this breaks, it's nasty. Like these have killed people. 8 in the Olympic fencing arena. Maybe not arena, the circuit or whatever, the Olympic fencing sport. They're tiny, right? I don't know if you understand, you as a viewer of YouTube, because I have no viewers on Twitch. That's okay. I don't know if you understand like the conversation historically between cuts and thrusts and which ones are considered more deadly. But since we're talking about safety here and we're worried about blades, I feel like I'm saying that terribly wrong. We're worried about blades breaking. Thrusting, in my opinion, is why we wear Newton-rated clothing, to protect us from thrusts, blades that have broken and are continuing towards us. With longsword fetters, again, I've never seen one break in a thrust. It's always been in cuts. Not to say that it's not going to happen, because moving on to the next sword I have. This is an Arius, or Arius, or Arireus, or however you want to pronounce it, really. Vastly different. This is a little heavier than my Meyer, Albion Meyer. This is what I fence with. Now, I haven't checked this for burrs, right? I haven't. You can probably see on camera like little nicks and dents. Maybe. I don't know. Let's see. Gotta wait for my camera to catch up. Yeah, you can see little nicks and dents, right? I'm gonna run my finger across, right? Now, when you do this, to check it before you hand it to a tournament official who is checking your gear, you're wearing a glove and you can feel the leather catching on it. However, I'm confident that this is pretty damn good steel, and I want to purchase another one, but I'm worried about the wait times. And I never really have to worry about a burr on this one. Not to say that like there will never be a burr on it, because we're bashing metal together, and that's how, you know, sharp edges form. Ooh, I might have one right here. And there it is. It came off. It was so small that it came off on my finger. Now, it came off from the crossguard, which I don't know if it's tempered or not. I don't understand, or I do understand metal tempering, but like I don't understand what the smith did specifically, or what materials they used specifically. But we're going to compare that to my new fetter, all right? I should have like put these up here together, right? And like surprised everyone by turning them around, right? So look at the vast size difference in these two fetters. Now, these both can enter the same tournament. There's no reason, no rule stating that they can't. So we've looked at my Albion, my Arius. This is my Castile. It's new. I haven't sparred with it yet. I'm excited to. I haven't put a tip on it yet. But look at that blade profile. Right? We're starting to thin out. We're starting to get very light. We're starting to get very flexible. So what do we have to worry about now? I think we have to start considering wearing Newton rated clothing. We already do, never mind. Most, if not all, fencing tournaments require a 350N jacket, and that's that. That's the standard. That's what most tournaments are okay with. Will this catch a burr? Probably. Will it catch a bad burr? Probably not. I should clarify what a burr is, because burrs can be very big and they can be very small. If you've ever sharpened a knife, whether it's a pocket knife or a kitchen knife, or watched any videos on how to sharpen a knife from YouTube, what you're doing is you're creating an edge where the burr is a very microscopic, or maybe not microscopic, but early on it's a pretty big burr, right? The blade will lean over like this and it'll feel sharp, but it won't be, because this thin piece of metal right here actually isn't supported by anything, right? So then you flip over and you start sharpening on the other side, and the other burr pops up, right? And again, it feels sharp, and then you change grits, and that burr gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I've seen a 2-inch burr. That's, beefy in an industrial machining application. I also just had a burr flake off onto my finger. So to reference what a burr could do in terms of HEMA, I'm going to say, out of pure speculation and uneducated guessing, that a house cat and a severe burr in HEMA on a fetter can do the same damage, right? If you have a house cat, you understand that the claws can, scratch you up and make you bleed. But it's not going to require you to get stitches. In my opinion, that's uneducated and unfounded, because I don't have a house cat. So I've got 4 long swords here. We talked about the nylon. We talked about why I didn't tip the one. What we didn't talk about is why I tipped my other ones. This is a giant. It's bigger than my thumb. This is a giant rubber tip with I believe it has a metal washer on the inside of it. I think most all fencing tips do. And if they don't, they're like hard plastic for foils. Cool, whatever. This is a spatulated tip. That cast steel I showed you was a spatulated. It wasn't spatulated. Rounded. I would call that rounded. Spatulated means something slightly different. If you just imagine a giant spatula, a tiny spatula, where the end comes down and then flares out really wide. Different manufacturers make different things. Early on, almost all of the fetters were rolled tipped, and I don't have one I can show you because it's got a rubber tip on it, and I'm not going to take it off. The rolled tip, like the end of the blade, in the process of manufacturing, is rolled into a hollow hole to fold back on itself, the tip, to provide a little more surface area, and I think that's as far as it got, right? We don't want a sharp tip. What do we do with the tip? We don't want a big chunk of steel on the end of it, because then it turns into like a hammer, and the balancing turns into like a weird forward weighted thing. So anyway, most manufacturers have the option for a rounded or spatulated or rolled tip. I've seen rolled tips, by the way. Uh, Injury. Um, Scoop out a piece of skin on someone, right? Just scoop it right out. It wasn't sharpened. It was a rounded piece of metal, and it just not on the palm. I can't remember where it was. I want to say it was on the arm, or I don't know. It just scooped out a little piece of skin. Uh, I've seen someone with a messer with a rolled tip, which is weird, I think, because the blade is really wide. And it's rolled in what I would consider to be the wrong direction. Uh, Straight tear. Uh, I want to say maybe an inch and a half to 2.5 inches gash on a 350N jacket. Because remember, that's puncture resistant. It's not cut or tear resistant. That I mean, it is, but the rating is for puncture, as far as I understand. I've heard about a rolled tip going through someone's palm. I've seen in between someone's fingers get punctured but not inserted, right? The one through the hand was inserted and had to be pulled out. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I believe the source, right? Is that to say tips can't puncture skin? Well, that's why we put rubber tips on them. That's why we put leather tips on them. There was a study, not a study, there was a group of people that were trying to start a Patreon to test what tip is the best, and it didn't get funding, so it didn't work. I always recommend putting a fencing tip on a sword that has a metal washer in it, because I've also seen rubber tips deteriorate over time, and the fetter punch through the rubber tip. So it's like you have a tip, but you're not safe because there's no metal washer to stop the tip from coming through. So after repeated thrusts, that rubber deteriorates and wears down, and then just breaks right through. There's an argument on whether or not rubber tips promote concussions. And in the same sense, there's argument to say that unprotected tips also cause injuries, but not necessarily concussions. The theory that I think is halfway proven is the rubber gets caught on the mesh on the mask and sticks. But I also believe 90% of that comes from excessive force and excessive thrusting. Or if you're like me at the last event I was at, you jump into the end of somebody else's fetter and, waffle yourself. It happens. That's the risk I signed up for. Which I didn't put that down in one of my talking points about assumed risk. I don't think. I'm going to add that right here. Cool. All right, so I touched on excessive force, so I'm going to start going into excessive force. I've always tried to be a good fencing partner. And I regret this, but I was told a very long time ago that I was scary to fence because I hit too hard. About 2 years after the fact of sparring the person that told me this. And they said, I'm really glad that you got better and you changed how you fence because you were scary to fence. I said, what do you mean? They said, you hit way too hard. Why didn't you tell me that? Why wasn't I informed? Why didn't anyone mention, hey, just calm down a little bit, right? Again, 2016, 2017, 2018, whatever. We all change, we all grow, we all turn into the better versions of ourselves as long as we keep working towards that goal. However, once I realized, hey, I'm hitting too hard and I don't want to hurt or concuss anyone, because I have seen concussions from people that I respect in this community. like, it's a scary thing, right? It's, hey, this person just got brained, right? I got some brain damage from that hit. It's not something I'm going to feel comfortable accidentally doing, so I'm going to do everything in my power to prevent that. Which means, personally, I cut and thrust to the silhouette. What does that mean? Right, well, you see my head here. My head is the silhouette, right? So you cut and stop at the silhouette. Your targeting and control have to be precise. If you're not a martial artist, why is it called historical European martial arts? Right? You have to be in control at all times, in my opinion. I always try to mention and say, I want people empowered to communicate. Hey, that was too hard. Hey, calm down a little bit. Or hey, I want to take it easy today. Like, communication is one of those things that I'm really big on, because most people have a different definition of words or phrases than another person, right? So a lot of miscommunications happen for one reason or another. And it's best to talk about things, right? Make sure you're on the same page with your sparring partner. Make sure you're on the same page with what you're doing when you pick up a fetter just for regular class, right? What are we doing, right? Communicate. With excessive force, I want to talk about, the agreement that you take, or the agreement that you agree to when you're sparring someone. We've got some really light sparring in the back of that video right here. Nothing too crazy. But some people like to fence crazy. Some people like to fence hard. Some people like to really put forth a lot of effort and determination behind every strike. Is that wrong? It's not what I want to do. That doesn't make it wrong. Right and wrong is subjective in most cases, in my opinion. If people want to go hard, as long as they consent to it, like, cool, you understand the risks you take. Or do you? Did someone explain to you, hey, if we go too hard, you could twist your knee and hurt yourself. You could get hit too hard and have a concussion. You could have damaged equipment and come out just fine. You have to understand what you're doing when you pick up a sword. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. But with that, you have to understand not everybody is going to be a 250-pound, 6-foot jock who wants to concuss you, right? Because this sport, right, martial art, whatever you want to call it, is inclusive. And that's something else I want to make sure that I'm clear on, is everyone's welcome, right? I'm not gatekeeping anybody. You want to come out, you want to be cool, you want to be respectful, you want to take to heart the code of conduct that most schools have. You should definitely, I'm just going to replay the video. You should definitely consider reading some code of conducts and making sure that you're following code of conducts to make everyone feel safe and invited and accepted, because at the end of the day, this is supposed to bring people together, not separate people, right? HEMA is for everyone, right? In my opinion. Let's see what we're talking about here. Oh, I did talk about tips, fencing tips, right? I talked about the leather, I talked about the rubber, I talked about the hand penetration. I assume that there was other instances that I don't know about through context clues on Facebook recently. I'm not going to dig. I'm not going to ask no questions. I don't want anyone to relive a traumatic experience. But what I'm going to say is, if you have an incident in your club or in your school that people can learn from to avoid, you should share those with people you trust, or you should share those with people you don't want to also make those mistakes, or you should share those with people who don't know any better, because They just don't know. They haven't thought about the risk. They haven't thought about what they signed up for when they signed the waiver and when they decided to pick up a fetter and hit someone in the head with it, right? I think communication, again, is where HEMA lacks in more ways than one. I talked about blade profiles, Olympic foils versus longswords, and I touched on it a little bit, but I think the way some longswords are going, lighter and thinner and more flexible, that we do have to consider the risk of blades breaking in a thrust, and that's scary, right? Because it isn't a little foil, right? It's so when a foil breaks, it has the entire weight and mass and velocity of the person that thrust behind it. The longsword is the same way, only it's a longsword and the piece of steel is bigger and it's going to have more force on it. So when it does snap, it's going to be like a coil spring breaking and potentially being dangerous and hazardous. Thankfully, we all wear jackets that are at least 350N. Some of us wear plastrons. I occasionally wear a plastron, depending on what I'm doing. But the one thing I would like to see is more blade catches on gorgets, right? I had an instance where a tip, sorry, I got my dog chewing on himself over here. You go, boy. Where a tip bounced off of my chest protector, slid up my chest, hit my gorget, slid up over my gorget, right in the throat. And I felt where it was on this side. I can't remember. I felt my throat, my entire esophagus move, right? Thankfully, I was okay. I was wearing all my protective gear. Did I know that's what I signed up for? Sure. You should read some of the waivers you sign. You should read some of the terms of agreement that you click on. Shit's wild. I think our gear really needs to be scrutinized coming up with this new evolution of blade design, in my opinion. I say that a lot. Alright, so I'm going to talk about jeans, leggings, shorts, and exposed skin versus cat scratches. If you're wearing jeans, you can still get scratched by a cat. Happened to me. If you're wearing leggings, sure enough, cat's going to scratch you. If you're wearing shorts, it depends on what type of shorts you got. But yeah, you're going to get scratched by that cat. And if it's on the lower leg, it's going to be worse. If it's on, then it's on the upper leg. But there's not going to be much difference, in my opinion. But what type of hazards and risks do we face if we have exposed skin while fencing? Well, we kind of talked about it earlier, right? We talked about hematomas, and the greater chance of broken bones, right? We talked about thrusts and broken blades. We talked about burrs, right? More likely than not, most people are going to be targeting the head, the hands, and the torso. That's not to say leg shots aren't a thing, right? Personally, I like thrusting to the leg. Personally, I like thrusting to the inside of the upper thigh. But I don't think I've ever, punctured anything because I have tips on my swords. I check my swords before tournaments. And my control, in my opinion, and in some other people's opinions, is pretty outstanding. If you are worried about injuring someone, take a step back, focus on your control, focus on your intent, and slow it down. Build up the skill to feel comfortable sparring someone who might not be wearing optimal gear. Because it's going to happen. Now, you can be the safest person in the world. It's happened to me. Oh, yeah, let me just go ahead and get a drink of water and take a little break, take this gear off, and then we'll be ready to start sparring again. All right, I got my water, got me something to drink, put my mask on, zip up my jacket, go a round or two. Oh, wait, I left my gorget off. It happens. Mixed weapons, right? Oh, I'm going to set this down. I'm going to set my longsword down. I'm going to pick up my shield. I'm going to take my forearm guard off and change my gloves. Or I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to pick my longsword back up to go do something else. I'm going to switch gloves, but forget my forearm and elbow, right? It happens. Accidents happen. People, including myself, are forgetful, right? It is what it is. If you have control, the chances of injury drastically decline, in my opinion. If you don't feel comfortable fencing someone who's not wearing what you would consider to be the appropriate gear, guess what? You don't have to fence them. You can communicate. You can stand up for what you believe in and say no. Sorry, I don't want to fence you. You're not wearing the proper gear. Oh, no, it's fine. I'm not going to wear my gorget this round. It's not fitting right. I twisted my neck last night. All right, well, no thanks. I'll find someone else to spar. Super easy. I think a lot of people in HEMA are worried about being confrontational. Confrontational does not mean argumentative. It could mean argumentative. It doesn't mean hostile. Argumentative could mean hostile, but conflict doesn't mean hostility. It could mean hostility. It's one of those things. It depends on the intention, right? When you're fencing someone, you're in a conflict. When you disagree with somebody, you're in a conflict. It doesn't have to be a hostile conflict. It doesn't have to be, people yelling at each other. You can absolutely have a disagreement and still be friends at the end of the day, right? The extremes of, if you don't do this, you're wrong. If you don't do what I do, you're wrong. I think that's really an opportunity for personal growth to happen. And I think, maybe this year, maybe next year would be a good turning point for that. Because there have been a lot of instances in HEMA where drama is just completely unnecessary. There, I said it. I don't want to be part of a sport or a martial art where every event or every other weekend I'm having to hear, well, did you see what they did? Or did you see what this person did? Or did you see how this tournament was running? Or, oh, this director this or that judge that. Like, who cares? Like, go do your best. Call it a day. I got off on a tangent there. I was rambling. Oh, I kind of covered that. Okay, so rules on underclothing and why I think it should change in the future, right? I've already preloaded that earlier in the video. Blades are getting lighter, right? I like to play with small sword. That has a chance to break, 100%. This is my side sword, right? That profile and thickness is still pretty thin, right? It's still a one-handed sword, still has flex, but it's lighter than anything else on the market as far as I know. This is my rapier. It's a very, very long rapier. For that blade profile, it's like a diamond cross section. So it's going to look like it's super thin. All right. It's still pretty thin. I'm going to let my camera catch up so I can see if I'm holding that right. Oh, there we go. That's probably better. But yeah, what do we do with a rapier, we thrust, right? And the chances of it breaking are going to get greater and greater the thinner and lighter we go. It's almost like we have historical accounts of blades breaking, right? Not only in the modern era, but the historical era as well. Do your own research. I'm lazy. So there was an event. I'm not going to name the event. And it was a few years ago. It was before the end times. It was before COVID. I don't know if I can even say that on Twitch. It was before everybody was getting real sick and fucked up and shit. But the event specified 350 Newton rated clothing or greater will be worn on top and bottom. Right? So Spez came out with the sweatshirt and the sweatpants that were 350 N rated. Great, awesome. I ordered a pair, tops and bottoms. I did a group order on the bottoms. And awesome, great. They don't really breathe well. There's no padding, but they're Newton rated. They passed, the rule set. Cool, awesome. I spent, I think it was $100 on the pants, maybe $130 on the shirt. I don't know. So over or almost $250 if you included shipping and everything. But because not enough people purchased that product or a product like it to cover their legs, their complete legs in 350N, the event said, you know what, never mind, we're going to retract that statement. Or we're going to retract that rule. Well, what's the point of even dealing with rules if the event organizers are not going to follow those rules? That's another topic completely. But if the event that you go to says you have to untip your sword to compete, which means you have a bare blade, you have a bare fetter with no rubber, no leather, but you really believe that rubber tips are safer, what type of character does it show you have when you remove that rubber tip to spar at a higher intensity than you normally would in-house in your club at an event that disallows rubber tips or leather tips, right? But I believe rubber tips are safer. Well, then why'd you remove your rubber tip and go to an event you didn't agree with? Hey, that's all I'm going to say. You got to stand up for what you believe in. You got to organize with your local community and your local clubs to standardize what you accept at your events and your local events. That's a call to action. I believe, obviously, I'm not going to be trying to communicate on a daily basis with people who live 10 hours away because I'm not going to see them on a regular basis. But in my local community, which I think is about an 8 to 10 hour drive away from my location, that I think we see each other on a yearly basis at least, right? I think there should be some sort of standard within our organization. Well, I lied, it's not an organization. There should be a standard that we all agree on somewhere, right? We should all wear fencing masks when we fence, right? That's a great rule to have. We should all wear gloves when we fence. Hard plastic, protection gloves when we fence. Of course, great, cool. I think different regions and locations should get together and talk about these things and within their own area come up with a standard, right? If you want that standard to be no one wears short shorts, cool. That's a great starting point. But there are so many other things to worry about. Why don't we say, all right, if you want to fence in this tournament, you have to wear a mouthpiece. I've seen multiple people get their teeth broken or chipped. Just wear a mouthpiece. They're like $20, $30 if you want to get fancy, $50 if you're rich or something, or you want like your name in it or something. I don't know. But there are so many things that the community can benefit from if people just get together and speak like adults and communicate on the best way to positively reinforce a fencing community, right? The HEMA community, right? I covered everything. Holy shit. I actually didn't mean to. I meant to talk a little longer, make this a little more boring. I want to say I covered everything, but I know I didn't. I know as soon as I cut the feed, the stream, that I'm gonna say, oh, I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have said that. If you have any questions, I'm on Facebook. I ain't gonna tell you my name, but I'm on YouTube. You can fucking send me a comment, send me a message, send this around, see if anybody knows who I am, and ask me a question, right? I really think going forward, some changes have to be made. What those changes are, I can't tell you what to do in your school. I'm not going to tell you what to do in your school. I'm not going to go to your event if I don't agree with your event. But in the same breath, I'm not going to go to your event, go against something I believe in, go home, shit talk with all my friends, and then weeks later get on YouTube or get on Facebook or get on Twitter and complain about something I saw weeks ago, right? You should have the authority of yourself to stand up for what you believe in. Now, that doesn't mean go out and tell everybody else, you can't do this because I don't agree with it. That's not how this works. If you're worried about your insurance policy for whatever reason, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not an insurance guy, right? I will say, if you are part of the HEMA Alliance, follow their protocols. If you're not part of the HEMA Alliance, follow your insurance protocols. Follow, the policies, right? That's the best thing to do, is just follow directions. If you don't know, ask your club leader. If they can't tell you, they don't want to tell you, maybe find a new club. Start a new club. It's super easy. You just start a club, right? Officially, I just meet up with my friends and we talk about stuff, right? I want to do something more than that, but we'll see what happens. We'll see where life takes me. Been pretty busy recently. What you want, puppy dog? You go, boy. Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate that there are so many other things that we can positively, or we can change in a positive manner. And sorry, now I'm watching this video. There's so many other things we can focus on instead of jumping on one bandwagon this week and another bandwagon next week. All right. Be the change that you want to see. I don't know who said that, but they said it, and a lot of people believe it, but a lot of people have forgotten it. So I think with that, I'm going to sign off. Just do better. Not for anybody else, but for yourself.